think about political blackness, I know you've been vocal about the dangers of it and why we need to be more cautious of actually saying, be it Black people, Asian people, and distinguishing different races. Can you just tell me why you think it is important that we don't use terms like BME?
Well, on a basic level, there is an homogenization of experiences. It conflates experiences, it decontextualizes experiences, and it means that there are some communities at risk of falling through the gap. And therefore, one, we need to just, as I said, for me, in a really obvious way, I think we need to acknowledge that it's very unhelpful when it comes to looking at research, for example. If we say BME, and we really unpick that, actually what we might see is that some voices or experiences might be more overrepresented in studies than others. So therefore we need to question, why is that happening, and how can we ensure that we are being more accessible and more open to hearing different experiences. At the same time, I personally, for me as a Black woman, I'm, Black, born here, Jamaican, being Black, in terms of the heterogeneity of just Blackness in itself, it's so diverse, it's so rich. I really struggle with the word BME, that kind of, BME people, because I'm like, I've not grown up ever adopting that terminology. I don't believe I was ever asked if that's something I would want to be described as. So I don't use that terminology. I find it offensive.
No, I hear you. And do you know what? Like, I was talking on the call with my friend before, and I was talking about how people need to really understand, and I know you just spoke on the I can't even say that word, homogeneous. You use a big word. You research, you be using some big words. But like the importance of like understanding, even in the BME, the differences. So you spoke about the fact that you're Jamaican, I'm Nigerian, and so like even when I think about the Windrush scandal, right? So like I know a lot of Nigerians who have had issues with immigration, but it wasn't in the same way in which the Windrush scandal affected people from the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica. And so it's like people need to really understand like the differences even in the B. So even in Nigerians, there's also differences. Like, okay, there's a lot of Yoruba people who are in the UK. There's not a lot of Igbo people. So what does that mean even if you had a Nigerian service? That still needs to be diverse in some way, shape or form. So like, I'm probably with you. So what do you think we should do moving forward? Do you think we need to be saying if it's Black, it's Black? If it's Asian, it's Asian? Or how do you think we can...
You need to say what you mean.
Say that again?
You need to say what you mean. Say who are we talking about? I think I can understand why sometimes language such as BME might be used in terms of wanting to acknowledge in some way the common or commonalities in terms of the different experiences of oppressions people may face. But I think when we're talking about, as a really basic example, when we talk about criminal justice, the police, that history of stop and search and the overrepresentation, for example, of young black men full stop, we know that they are impacted very differently than, say, somebody who is from a South Asian background. So therefore, I think those things matter. We know when we think about the experiences of Black women, these caricatures of us being strong and hypersexual, etc., etc., that is very, very much based on the depiction of a Black woman, not the same as the assumed, gosh, the term has just come out of my head, but of the submissive woman, and unable to speak up and have a voice, all of those things. And I think therefore it's really important that we acknowledge that as well, because I think that locates different communities and experiences in various ways. So I think personally, I would like us to get to a place that we can just name what we mean and who we're talking about and who we're not talking about. And I think that is probably maybe the easiest stance to go down, is whether it's through research, whether it's our actual services, when we're saying we're a BME service, actually who's missing from your services? So we say we support Black and minoritized women, but actually we have an underrepresentation of Black Caribbean or Black African women. We need to be more accountable to the language we use, and again, to who is and who is not receiving our service.
110%. I couldn't say it better myself. Listen, and like it's when I think about your research, right? Where are all the Black girls? Imagine if you were Asian and you thought you was gonna, someone would say this is BME research, right? And, or they could say it's BME research. And so imagine if you were Asian and you was looking for some answers and they found your research. I'm not gonna lie, I'm sure they'll be a little bit vexed because you're specifically speaking about Black girls as opposed to Asian girls. And so I think it's really important, like you said, to just name the things the way that they are, so it's easier for everybody, right? Just now when you were speaking, you used the word sexualization. Also, when I've listened to you speak, and you was featured on BBC Women's Hour, people should go and check that out. I'll put the link somewhere in the YouTube stuff, right? You also use the terms adultification. Could you just explain some of these phrases and some of these words that are used to describe Black women and Black girls, I should say? Could you just explain a little bit about terminology and how that can affect the way in which we are seen when using services or in schools?
Yeah. So let's start with adultification. So adultification basically means when young people are perceived as being more adult-like. So the term adultification really was formed and has been influenced very much by research conducted in the US, which found that for both African American boys and girls experience this adultification. So from a young age, like from the ages of like 5 and upwards, they're perceived as being more adult-like, which means that their vulnerability and the innocence which we tend to assume, is afforded to all children and young people is certainly not afforded to them. And it also means that that concept of vulnerability, of support, nurture is also not afforded. So instead it's replaced with assumptions that they're more resilient, less in need of protection, which are actually quite harmful attitudes to have. Now, when we think about what that then means in terms of services, if we have, I'm specifically now talking about the experiences of Black girls and women, but if you're a Black girl and you are perceived as being in less need or perceived as being more sexual or sexually aware, if you're experiencing harm, whether that's sexual or not, what does that mean in terms of how professionals may view you? What does that mean in terms of how you may actually understand and acknowledge your own experiences if you're so used to being assumed to be the strong, independent, resilient person? So I really wanted to bring adultification to the UK in terms of wanting to contextualise what's happening in terms of the experiences for Black girls who live in the UK, because I think sometimes we do this weird thing where any research which is conducted in the US, we reference, and I think it's really important, but it's just as important to contextualize and understand that there are different experiences here, and how Black women and girls are located within a UK context needs to also be understood. And what I identified through my research was adultification continues here. And I guess the subtlety is what's challenging. But overwhelmingly, all of these narratives and assumptions about Black girls being more sexual, in less need, angry, and having an attitude, this comes with a history and an historical context which you can date back to slavery, colonialism, where our femininity has in some way just been stripped, where our bodies were not seen as being held in any value, where we were seen as somebody else's property, where it was about ensuring that that oppressors and those who oppressed us dehumanized us to such an extent that we were just angry. It was easy to just say, well, we're angry and we're quite, strong, almost so strong that we can manage all pain and everything. Yeah. And that's on a continuum. To be very clear, this does not end when you reach adolescence, when you reach, womanhood or adulthood, I should say. This is something which has continued. You're born into it and it continues throughout your life course. So it's really important that we understand what adultification is, but where it's founded within, and that is racism.
Yeah, 100. Right about, I felt like I was in a lecture in a history class. I'm just taking in. I'm like, yes, you took us on a history lesson right there. As you were speaking, there were several things that kind of came to my mind. Like you once speaking about the fact that like we're born into it, one, because of racism, but also I think about even in the home. So being the first daughter of my Nigerian family, I have experienced how I've had to be an adult quickly just by being the eldest daughter. And then when I've gone into the wider world, because of my upbringing and like kind of conditioning of that, I kind of played and fit into that role. So even being in jobs, I'm like expected to be the one who should take stuff. And so I've really had to unlearn and really had to heal. And I've seen how, like you said, from birth, one in the home being conditioned and then going out to the wider society and that being reinforced.
Yeah.
Also, I loved your point about research and how research is so Americanized, and we're constantly like looking to America for their research, which is not a problem, but actually no, we need to find our own research. And when I first heard about your research, one of the first things that came to mind was this book called Push Out, and I'm just putting it up there so people can just go and buy it and read it, because we've got to promote Black people things, especially Black women's things. And also when anyone asks me about research on young Black girls, I'm always like, you know Jahnine Davis? Do you know Jahnine Davis? I'm always pointing people in your direction. And so I'm just letting you know we're waiting on that book, sis. We are really waiting on that book.
It's coming.
Oh yeah? Okay, cool. And so like, let's get into a bit of your research.
Yeah.
And just speak about, I guess I know why you done it, but it would be nice to kind of, in my mind, I know why you done it, but it would be nice to hear like why you done it and just a little bit of the process. In particular, it would be great to hear about how you felt during the process. I think there's really something about, as Black women doing this work, it isn't separate from us. It's like we're doing this work, but it's us. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So yeah, talk to me a little bit about, where are all the Black girls?
I think for me, it starts with my own personal journey, being a Black woman and what it was like being a Black girl. And for me, even more importantly, being a Black girl who was, you know, a care experienced young person in care in a children's home. And for me, that's where my journey really started in this work, was being in a children's home in an area which there was no one looked like me. I was in a predominantly white working class area after moving out of I'm from Bristol originally, grew up in St Paul's. And if anyone knows Bristol, if anyone knows St Paul's, very, very diverse. And in the 80s, 90s, very, very, Black, strong Black Jamaican, more so, community. So coming from that community and then going to a space where I didn't see anyone who looked like me, who understood me, understood my experiences, was very challenging. But even more so when then I was going into a children's home where the residential workers didn't understand my needs, always made me, I guess it made me question my identity in terms of my belonging and who I was. And I felt different. I felt ugly. I felt I didn't feel good enough. And I definitely felt so, undervalued. And I remember, like, through my experience, that's how I got into this, work. I've been working in child protection and safeguarding for a long time. And through working directly with young people up to managing services, and then in the position I'm in now as a director of a service and doing my PhD, the questions which I kept asking were...
Interrupt you. I just want to let everybody know, say that again, you're a director of a service and a PhD. No, for me it's important because it's like, we don't hear a lot of Black women being directors of your own thing. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So for me, I just think it's important to highlight that. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, go on.
No, thank you. But for me, a question I've constantly asked outwardly and within is, where are the Black girls? What's going on? Why am I not seeing us? And when we do, there is, I think we've almost done this really narrow approach to, it must be girls and gangs, Black girls and gangs. Now, what I don't want to do is completely unpick or unravel and disregard the great work people have done in terms of really shining a lens on the overrepresentation of Black girls who experience abuse within the context of gangs. However, I also want to ensure I make very clear and explicitly clear, Black girls we're not just in gangs. We also experience abuse inside the home. We also experience abuse in other contexts. And for me, that narrative has just been silenced. It's not there. And when I was doing my MA in women and child abuse, that's what really, I think, was a pinnacle moment for me, because I was sitting in this room and all of this research on, obviously it's about women and girls, so from a feminist perspective, everything about, sexual violence, intimate partner abuse, etc., etc. but yet I still wasn't hearing about the experiences of Black women and girls.
Yeah.
And any time, as I said, it was, for me, it was from an American transnational perspective. And it felt like I felt almost invisible, that I wasn't in the room. I was just like, well, where do our voices come into this? Because I'm a Black woman, I'm a, you know, as I said, I'm a practitioner, but I'm also a victim survivor myself. And I just thought, where would my experience sit in this space? And why aren't my experiences, or experiences like mine, being shared and been amplified in these spaces? And at that point, I remember just saying to the course lead, yeah, where are the Black girls? Where are the Black girls? Why are we not talking to Black girls? I'm telling you, I definitely probably was that irritating student because, you know, I was extra comfortable. I always sat at the front. So I was like, yeah, sorry, hello, excuse me, just something to say. I was that person. So it was really from that position where I just said, you know, sorry, we need to, I think, for me, there is something about accountability. We know there is an acknowledged gap in research. I'm fed up of reading research and seeing that footnote or that paragraph which will say, you know, we do know that there are some other vulnerable groups such as BAME, LGBT, disabled children and young people. But yet we keep saying the same thing. So therefore, why are we not placing a magnifying glass on that? Why are we not completely homing in to understand, well, what are those experiences, and how do we ensure that the research that we do doesn't always just overrepresent, you know, certain groups? And in the case of sexual abuse within the UK, predominantly those experiences are based on white British girls. And therefore, what does that mean in terms of the assessments and tools that we use in relation to the, to identify, effectively respond and understand those experiences, if they're very much shaped by an experience which might be very different to mine? So for me, there were two things. It was about getting the research out there, most importantly, getting our voices and experiences out there, but then wanting to really influence policy and practice. And whilst I was doing my course, my MA, I was working in a research centre at the time, and I was the only Black person in there. And I remember that feeling again of, you know, that deep fire, because I'm just like, I've just had enough now. I just had enough. I've had enough. Ooh. And yeah, that's what led me to do the research. In terms of research and the lack of focus on the experiences of Black women and girls, I think it's really important to acknowledge those who are in this space, especially in the realm of child protection and safeguarding. And for me, that would be Professor Claudia Bernard from Goldsmiths University. If you don't know who she is, please check her out. Her work is amazing. And I'm happy that I am now able to add to this knowledge gap, but I would like to see more of us in this space.
Yes, I guess because even when looking at your research, I saw that it was the first of its kind here in the UK. Yeah. Even listening to you as you speak, I'm even exhaling as you speak, because it's like you're trying to do this work, but still being a victim of racism while still trying to tackle it at the same time. And so, you know, like before we get into the actual research, could you just speak a little bit about what it's like for you? What it was like for you being was an MA student, a Black MA student, and trying to do this research? What was it like for you when you said to your lecturer at the time, excuse me, what about the Black girls? Or what were your cohorts? Like, what was their response to that? Was that difficult for you to navigate? Because imagine you're trying to like break the mold while still sitting in the racism that's all around.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what? It wasn't difficult for me to call it out. And I think that's because I've come from many years of calling out, and that doesn't take away from the impact. I think that's something for me which is different. I can talk about it, but I cried in my MA, you know, I cried when I was conducting my research, I cried when I was at home, because it impacted on me, because it's tiring, you know. Being Black is not some one-off event. I know we're talking about Black Lives Matter at the moment, and we're seeing all of these wonderful statements coming out about standing up for Black experiences, but I'm not a monthly thing. I'm not a one-off EDI training session. This is my life. So for me, and I'm raising Black children, so when I'm sitting in a space whereby yet again I'm feeling like I have to, whether it's in my MA, whether it's in the research centre, whether it's in, you know, when I'm at conferences and I'm having to feel like, can I just be that person to ask that question. I question, why isn't anyone else asking? It would be really nice if more hands could be getting raised rather than always feeling like it's one or two. It's really, really tiring. And I think that for me was very difficult to manage. One, because I guess on one extent, you're trying to be understanding and balanced and acknowledge that there are other experiences other than my own, which also need to be shared and explored and researched. But there is something going on here. There is something going on, and it's been going on for a long time, whereby that devaluation of our experiences is playing out in all different areas, and it's playing out in academia, it's playing out in research, it's playing out in practice, it's playing out in our policies. It is there, and I felt like there is an elephant in the room, and I for sure I'm not going to be silent about it. I can see it, so I will name it. I personally haven't got time to hold discomfort for others, because it's not personal. It's about ensuring that if we're saying we want to, especially in the context of, women and girls, if we're saying we want to ensure that, women and girls are, free of harm, then we need to ensure we're involving all women and girls in that narrative. And we can't say all if we know that we continuously have many who are being left out. So yeah. I know I didn't find it hard to talk up, but it was tiring.
You know what, quickly, can I just ask, what advice would you give to Black women? And at first I was going to say younger Black women, but no, not even younger Black women, period, who find it difficult to talk out or find it difficult to speak on things. I understand for several different reasons it's difficult for different people, but do you have any advice that you could give to anybody?
I guess I would say first, just be kind to yourself, because as I said, we speak up in various ways all of the time, and it can feel, there's something about just acknowledging, before I go into my answer, there's something about acknowledging that because we are located in such complexity, that if I speak up, I also have to think about my career. I have to think about, how I'm going to censor myself in some way, not to diminish or devalue what I want to talk about, but to protect myself, because I know that ultimately I am working in an establishment which does not look like me and which has quite a lot of power over me. So you're constantly navigating that. So therefore, sometimes it's difficult to speak up. Sometimes there's something about knowing what battles to pick and ones you need to leave right now. And that doesn't mean you're less than. It means that you have to navigate. You have to learn. For me, what I learned, I was definitely that person. Anyone, who knows me, I definitely, for a long time, was that person where I'm thinking, I'm challenging every single thing. You're going to hear my voice in every space. You're going to hear me. But not only did it become exhausting and actually had an impact on me in terms of just overall well-being, for me, I think I had to become a bit more aware and understanding of, okay, you have to be smart, isn't it? It's like kind of play fool to catch wise almost. I'm like, actually, there are some spaces which I know change, or I know I might have more of an impact than in some, and that's okay. So I would say for any Black woman who is wanting to speak up or to share their experiences in whatever way they would communicate those experiences, just know that you have something to offer.
Yeah.
Know that some of the things which I sometimes think are really basic in terms of imposter syndrome, I'm like, oh, this is just basic stuff I'm talking. There's going to be someone who does not know any of this. There's going to be someone who, for them, this is going to be like you dropping gems into their world. So talk up. But also, you don't have to do it alone. For me, I think what I love about just, being a Black woman, especially in this time, we have so many networks now, and spaces which I certainly didn't have access to growing up, whether that's via, I was on, I'm one of I signed up to Dope Black Women and their space, and I'm like, do you know how refreshing it is? Sometimes just not even to speak, but just to have other Black women in the space just talking, I've also, I'm with a research network group who they specifically have been set up to raise the experiences of African Caribbean students, PhD students, because there are not many of us, and being in that group and been like, oh, this actually, you know, been able to have people to feed off of or to share your concerns with. So for me, I would also say surround yourself with other, you know, with us, surround yourself with your community, surround yourself with like-minded people, let us share some of that burden or that anxiety too, because, you know, we're all here fighting.
Yeah, no, for real, for real. And as you were speaking, one thing that really came to mind was just this idea of survival. And I know what you're saying when it's just like, it's not every fight you have to fight. Sometimes you just got to survive. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, you just got to get through till you can get out. So I'm probably with you. I wanna go into the research. I wanna go into the findings of the research, and your just experience actually doing that work, actually speaking to young Black women and hearing about their stories around CSE, CSA. But before you quickly go into that, could you just quickly explain what CSE, CSA is, for people who don't understand what exactly you're speaking about?
So CSA is the acronym for child sexual abuse. CSE, child sexual exploitation. CSE, so child sexual exploitation, is a form of child sexual abuse. So I guess if you have child sexual abuse as the kind of umbrella term, and then underneath that, and sexual abuse may be intrafamilial, extrafamilial, intra being within the home, family networks, and extrafamilial being outside of the home, outside of the kind of familial environment. So that could be sexual abuse in schools, peer-on-peer abuse. CSA defines the different experiences and the different ways children and young people can experience sexual abuse. And this is very much based on whether that's through penetration, online, you know, as I said, peer-on-peer in schools, harmful sexual behaviour, and also to acknowledge that child sexual abuse, you can experience it in different contexts, such as within gangs, as we know, in terms of gang-associated sexual exploitation and abuse, or within wider criminal exploitation.
So tell us a little bit about your findings of your research. What was the main findings?
The main finding for me, well, my research question initially was around to what extent does the hypersexualization of Black women and girls impact on identification of sexual abuse? Because I guess my thinking was, we know that historically, you know, there was a time where it was legitimized, it was not illegal, to sexually abuse and rape Black women and girls. They were just a commodity. We were just seen as somebody else's property, and therefore there were no laws protecting us. And how that's also played out in terms of, I guess, that depiction that we almost innate in our sexuality, that we're just hypersexual and sexualized objects, but that's it, this objectification, and that we've been fetishized throughout history, and that continues to play out. You just have to turn on media like it's assumed. I know, I can't tell you how many times I've been out and there's this expectation that I'm going to be brocking out into some wine on my heads and toes.
You said on your head.
You know, this assumption that that's just what we do. We're just these tropical, exotic, erotic. You then have to think about porn, and it's like, you know, the big bums and the big breasts. You have to think about how it's played out in terms of from the scientific perspective of access to our bodies in relation to like the Hottentot Venus, you know, whereby our bodies were just paraded and experimented on, I should say, because we were seen as these abnormal beings. So I just thought, now this has played out, continues to play out. One, what does that mean in terms of our psyche and how we possibly may have internalized the stuff around, you know, just being sexualized and just being really sexually, not just available, but almost to be Black enough within our culture, you need to know how to wine. I know growing up in a Caribbean household, you better know how to wine. And for me, it was celebrated, you know, being really young. And I'm talking about, you know, toddler, 3, 4 even, and going to a party and everyone's skin and teeth in kekeke because they can see a little girl knowing how to brock out and wine. Now I'm like, on one hand, it's challenging because I would say that's part of our culture. But on the other hand, how do we ensure that actually we have some issues here we need to talk about, and how has external perceptions and that external force impacted on how we define our culture to be. So the research question really wanted to focus on if we are identified as being hypersexual and sexually available, and that comes through adultification as well, and being more sexually aware, what does that mean when it comes to professionals and services working with us, supporting us, identifying our needs in relation to sexual abuse? So the finding was hypersexual. We experience hypersexualization, but we also experience an array of other issues as well in terms of identification. Racism is the compounding factor throughout all. So we can't talk about hypersexualization without talking about racism. We can't talk about adultification in and outside of the home without talking about racism. We can't talk about the overvaluing of Black boyhood, which came up quite a lot, where, you know, when we talk about abuse, discrimination, historically, we have focused on the experiences of young Black men, of Black men. We focus on, as I mentioned earlier, you know, criminal justice and the discrimination which Black men encounter them. We only have to see how it's actually played out recently in terms of Black Lives Matter. It's horrific what our Black men go through. However, we seem to ignore. We have to see, again, from a US context, as well as what we're seeing in the UK, Black women, Black girls, where are we? Who's shouting for us? Who's advocating for our experience to be, you know, amplified and magnified and acknowledged? So this devaluing of Black girls and women also impacts on identification, also impacts on the internalization of feeling less than. There was also something which came up about shadism, colorism, and the Eurocentric depiction of beauty. And therefore, I remember one of the comments, and it does really haunt me. It really, you know, as I said, I think people have to understand that, you know, I'm Black every day, and being a Black woman and researching this was difficult. It came with challenges, and you definitely need self-care, and that has to be identified from the beginning, during, you know, throughout, the end, and after. Because I remember one of the women saying, you know, well, we're not seen as being beautiful, so sometimes you just almost be grateful for the abuse, you know, being grateful for experiencing sexual abuse, because, well, who's looking on us? Who's taking care of us? No one cares. We're seen as ugly, you know, we're seen as being less than. And if the darker you are, the broader your features, the less Eurocentric they are, almost even more so be more grateful that anyone's even bothered looking at you. That hurts, because the reality is I felt truth in that. You know, I felt truth in, I see how that has played out. It reminded me of what it was like growing up when I was younger and been called big nose and dry head and all of this rubbish. You know, I'm thinking it triggered a reality which we experience. And you can't talk about that without talking about racism and how that's impacted on how we may view ourselves and how people view us. Then there was something about, so as I said, as I'm explaining, there's, you know, when we think about sexual abuse and identification, it's so broad. We can't just think about hypersexualization over there. It's everything, and that intersectional experience, and how that manifests differently for somebody who may be, you know, of a middle class background, who has more access to, you know, support, finance, resource. Their experiences, they may still experience that level of, you know, those assumptions which determine and influence how professionals and services may support us, but then they also have different access to support in terms of resource as well. And then something came up around research, that actually, is research complicit? And one of the questions I asked was, is research complicit in silencing our experiences, or the experiences of Black women and girls? And I asked that question, you know, after I'd identified my findings, because people were saying, look, no one talks about us. I pick up research, I feel like I'm having to dig, like I'm on a treasure hunt almost, because when I pick something up, it will say BAME or BME. And ultimately, when I read them, I'm like, oh, this isn't even about my experiences. This might be about South Asian experience. This might be about Roma Gypsy travelers experiences. It's not about my experience. I can't identify with this. Hence why it's so important we don't homogenize. And then something came up around who's protecting us. And actually, the burden Black women and girls may encounter or experience, because we know Black boys and men experience such levels of oppression and discrimination within criminal justice. If you're experiencing abuse, how must I as a Black woman now feel so confident to report when I know what system I'm reporting this Black man into? And what does that mean for me? What does that mean in terms of, am I selling out? All of this stuff, which might not be at the forefront, but has influenced how we manage and locate ourselves. And, trauma, intergenerational, historical trauma came up throughout in terms of, we look at services and are they trusting spaces? When we see a service, do we think this is somewhere which is going to understand my needs? Are services really, are they reflective of our experiences in terms of, again, through the assessments that they use to initially identify? But also there was something about how can we, for those who do experience abuse, there is a limited space to speak. There are limited spaces to access. So this research, I identified, I've designed an image called Complex Spaces to highlight the various ways Black women and girls are located within, to really highlight how challenging it is in relation to not just experiencing abuse, it's even having a space to acknowledge that you've experienced abuse. The narratives, again, which I've said earlier, came out a lot, like, well, we're just perceived as strong, we get boxed down, and it's almost like, well, you just have to hold it. We're not allowed to be vulnerable, we're not allowed to feel soft, we're not allowed to cry, no one sees us as strong. This term resilience, and how harmful that terminology is, because if we only use it, again, resilience is used as a term of empowerment, like, just being really resilient, almost positivity. But if you've always had to survive, if you've always had to struggle, we have to understand, what does resilience look like in terms of the experiences of Black women and girls? And if you've always had to be that strong person, because there is no way that if you fall, no one's catching you, or when you have fallen, you've just knocked your head and you have to then somehow grab yourself and pick yourself back up. Resilience might not always feel so positive, because it might feel like it's something which is enforced within us, which we've always had to do. So yeah, complex.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You said so many important things there. So many important things. One of the things I want to pick up, and this is something that I was having a conversation with a woman called Dr. Fiona Vera Gray around, is you love Fiona, is around, as Black women, like you said, reporting Black men, and what does that mean for us, and that difficulty of, almost not wanting to put another Black man in the system, and also like our safety and all of those kind of complex things that come with being a Black woman and understanding Black men's position in society. How do you think we as Black women can navigate that? Like, how do you think we can do ourselves justice while still holding Black men accountable for their wrongdoings or actions?
I think it's a really hard question to answer, because I think ultimately it's more about a discussion needs to happen with Black men. There's something about, for me personally, I'm at a place in my life where I'm speaking up all of the time, but I'm very aware that by me speaking up, not just from a research perspective, but just as a Black woman, as somebody within my community, that I not just might feel, shunned in some way, but that, people might, frown upon me and what I'm about and why I'm doing this. But for me, there is something just about accountability. And I think for me, I have to think about my worth. And as I said, this continuum, I coined this term a continuum of devaluation. Really, you know,
that you coined the term what? Because I don't want to try and come and steal your term. So
a continuum of devaluation, yeah. So it was really to extend from Professor Liz Kelly, her continuum of sexual violence. And something for me which I felt was missing was how does the experience, when we add in the intersections of, you know, race, ethnicity as an example, what does that then look like, you know, for Black women and girls? And throughout the research, what was coming up, the concept of value was spoken about throughout all of the research, and constantly feeling devalued, feeling less than. And for me, that notion of value didn't, as I said, it didn't just end within childhood. It was on a continuum that Black women and girls continue to experience devaluation. We continue to feel less than, and again, you know, the overvaluing of Black men continues to happen, and sometimes therefore limits our spaces to be able to just acknowledge our own feelings and experiences, but also to feel protected, to be protected from harm. So I coined the term a continuum of devaluation to identify that. And it's not new, you know, something I'd seen in some research, and the name's gone, just it's in my head. In the US, I think it was in 2007, this research was conducted, and she was talking about value. You know, and I was like, actually, we're saying the same thing, but I think then we need to name what we're talking about, and it's a continuum of devaluation here. And I think until that there is a focus and an acknowledgement on the value of Black women, I think it's always going to be really quite challenging for us not to just speak out about it, but more as a collective. And I would say that notions of our, you know, assumed strength for me lead into devaluation, that our experiences continue to be devalued because we're just seen as strong and we can manage everything, you know. I guess going back to your question, I guess from a personal perspective, when I, you know, myself, I experienced, you know, abuse, and it was really difficult speaking up. I really struggled. I felt really bad. I felt guilty for a long time, considering I was the one, you know, I was the victim who had experienced, you know, awful abuse, but I felt so guilty. And I went to, so, you know, through friends and, you know, family to try and, you know, I guess almost just prop me up, to just tell me and to constantly affirm me. And I think that's why it's so important Black women and girls have spaces to access, because if you don't have spaces to access and hear those narratives and hear those affirmations of worth, of self, it's very, it can be quite a lonely space. So I don't know if that answers the question, because I don't think it's a very difficult, I think it's really challenging.
It is. And I think just listening to the last bit that you said, like in terms of spaces, we need to sometimes hear somebody else said, yeah, it was difficult for me too. Like I didn't necessarily want to report, but I needed to, or I had to, or I didn't before. Because as we know, as a community or communities, Black communities, it can be difficult reporting anything. Like even for me being a practitioner and having to work with the police is a little bit of a mindfuck sometimes. I'm just like, bruh, like this is a very weird, complex thing. Like I'm working with police, but like, yo, I got stopped the other day though. Like it's a lot. Like it is really a lot to deal with. So I fully understand what you're saying. What I wanted to ask you before, this is what kind of came to mind. This is what I was gonna say. So thinking about when I think about the quote about the young woman who said about, like, you know, we should be happy that we're experiencing abuse. I'm probably thinking about so many more things, hearing so many more things, thinking about how many more things you heard throughout the process of you doing your research. Is there anything after hearing the stories, the accounts, the perspective that changed you, or will change your practice, or even change the way in which you parent? Is there anything that you think it was like, oof?
Honestly, there were points where I just wasn't okay. That's the truth. It really, I almost felt protective of the information. I didn't want to share it. I didn't know how to share it. I didn't want to share it because I was like, I can't let people know what's happening. And that was difficult for me to even want to acknowledge, because I'm like, Jahnine, what are you doing? On a basic level, it's not ethical for me to do that. But actually, just me being a human being, a Black woman in a space whereby I'm now going to share this to a predominantly white academic space, how can I do this? How can it didn't sit right. And I remember calling my friend, and he came over. And I told him, I was like, I don't know how to manage it. And he said, he was like, oh gosh, what are you going to do? You know, can you share all this information? How are you going to manage this? And I cried. I cried because I had a duty as a researcher, as a Black woman, just a person, as a human being, to share this information and put it out there. And to those women who had been so brave, not just to talk about their professional, but their personal. This was personal. This was not this rigid, professional, dry space. This space had tears, it had laughter, it had pain. It was that space. And I was like, this is important for me. I need to share this. And then there was this extra burden and pressure that I was like, I need to make sure it's the best of the best of the best of the best. It can't, and that really, really, that was a big thing for my confidence, and I felt it was horrible. I was like, oh my gosh, what if I get a really crap mark? Or what if it's just like not received well? I'm just letting everyone down, and I'm letting my Blackness down. That's what I felt. I don't know if I might be going off route with what you asked me now. My head's just gone, but
I feel like even when you were speaking, like I'm smiling, and like and I'm making bare sound effects, because I feel you. I guess doing This Is Us, I felt that, like, even speaking to women about their stories, I'm like, I felt very protective of the women and of their stories. And really, during the editing process, in particular to some of the young women, there was one young woman in particular, and she spoke about a story of her being, in her story, she spoke about a boy, about like her having sex with a guy she was singing. And she said it in quite a lot of detail. And I had to say to her, now, but sis, do you want to give this much detail? Do you understand, like, this book is going out and you want to have your name on it, and think about all of these things? And like, I couldn't not want to protect her in it, but equally I had to give her her own respects of her wanting to share whatever part of her story she wanted to share. Right. And that's something that I found very difficult throughout the time, because like, I want to protect you, but I want you to be free. And so you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I felt like I had a duty to safeguard, but also I wanted her to experience freedom. And maybe for her, saying all of that was her freedom that I didn't want to stop. So yeah, I get that. I get it so much. Like, I'm just, well, I get it. Yeah.
And as well, I think there was something about it through my MA and the research process. It highlighted some things within me which I was like, oh gosh, I thought I was okay. I thought I'd managed this. I thought my journey, my trauma, I was like, I realized I was like, oh wow. It actually forced me to look within myself about where I'm at. And actually I realized, I still have some healing to do. And I didn't like that. I felt exposed. I felt through doing the research, I exposed myself as well. And I guess, we know, you experience, you go through things in life. It's not just, okay, that's it now, it's over. It impacts you in various and different ways. But I thought I was over that impact until I started my MA, until I started in especially my research. So it was almost, and at some points, therapeutic to actually be in a space with Black women, hearing their accounts and making me feel the level of shame I held when I experienced abuse. I felt embarrassed. And we know, without, the context and it been racialized and, that intersectionality, we know that just women as a whole experience that level of, shame because of the negative, narratives which come along with, just domestic abuse and wider abuse within society, and those myths. So I knew that was there, but there's something different, you know, when we look at it from that through an intersectional lens, it's very different. And I know for me as a Black woman who'd experienced harm, it was like, what are you doing? You should have been strong enough. What are you talking about? You knew how you were raised. If anyone puts their hands on you, you know what you need to do. You know how you need to handle yourself. So how am I that person? And because growing up, externally, people just assumed I was this strong person. It was like, that happened to Jahnine.
Yeah.
So embarrassed. And I definitely felt like I just wasn't worth anything. And I think through this process, hearing other women from different walks of life talk about their experiences of sexual abuse, of, you know, just physical harm and emotional abuse, and those narratives of being told that you're ugly and you're not good enough and you're not pretty, and all of these things, it actually helped me, you know, acknowledge where I was on my journey too, and what additional work I needed to do within myself.
So similar to the experience where like you said, I thought I was cool. I thought I was Miss Healing. Always talk about healing, doing the work, doing the inner work, you know. And when I tell you, I went into a state of depression doing This Is Us. Like, there was a time I was actually on Dawson High Road crying. Like, I haven't told no one this year, but like, I left my house. I walked to, like, I'm Stokey. I walked all the way down to Dawson, all the way down to like Hoxton, walked all the way back to Newton Green. Like, I mean, crying. Like, I was like, bro, I can't do this. And realizing it in that process, as much as I, you know, brought women and girls stories to the forefront, it really had a lot to do with me and me doing some work for myself. And it was important, and it really made me rethink what self-care looks like for me and what self-care is to me. And I know you've like spoken about resilience, like, and how resilient am I, and do I need to be that resilient? And, you know, me always wanting to think I'm a G, and actually saying, like, you might be G with a lowercase G now, because you don't need to be, you don't need to be this gangster. Like, it's okay. It's okay, especially if I'm sitting here and I'm asking women for their stories. I had to be vulnerable too. Like, there was a level of vulnerability that I had to give, even if it wasn't necessarily to them, but to the book. And I just found that really important. And I guess I want to speak a bit about self-care. In particular about self-care as a student, as a Black student. What does self-care look like for you now after doing this piece of research and going through what you went through? What does self-care look like now for you?
Self-care is just medicinal, you know. It's something which I think there's almost a buzzword with self-care, like we use it, but I question, do we really understand it and really use it and ensure that we're really taking care of ourselves? I think what I've learned to do, you know, because it's a continuation, you know, I've done my MA and I went straight into my PhD, focusing on, you know, the same area, but bringing in the experiences of Black boys. And before anything, for me, it was who's around me, who is around me, who am I bringing around me? You know, I had to acknowledge, you know, from just even the first day of going in to meet my supervisor and saying self-care, you know, I have a mentor, I access therapy, just to have a space. And that I don't need to access it all the time. It's just so when I know when I need a space, I have one I can access. Self-care for me also means saying no. No. I'm not willing to talk on everything all of the time. And acknowledging, as I said, the position of being a Black woman, a Black female researcher, a Black mum, Black, I'm Black. So for me, there is something about ensuring that I really take care of my well-being, my mental health. So for me, saying no allows me to do that. And also my children, I had to think throughout this process, the impact my research, and you know, at the time I'm a sole carer, I'm a sole parent, it's just me raising 2 children. I was doing a full-time I was working full-time at the same time. It was a lot. And I think for me, that definitely made me gather myself a bit to be like, what are you playing at? Why are you trying to mash yourself down for? Like, you don't have to be this person. You don't have to, like, you know, well, I'm ticking all the boxes of what strength, whatever strength looks like by doing all of these things. Sometimes it's saying I can't manage that and no, I'm not going to do it. And also having my children around me, they're a part of my self-care. One of my children check me a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding them. They're like, Mum, you're just on the phone. Mum, oh gosh, yeah. I mean, my son's walked in many a time since we've been recording. So they, you know, and I think that definitely helps me in terms of having, just stepping aside from this, because there is almost an invisible armor we have to wear as Black people, as Black women, and people don't always see that. So therefore, they may not always acknowledge what we're walking with and what we've walked through. So but I do know that, and therefore for me, I just have a responsibility to take care of myself. So I think self-care, depending on, you know, some people, I know some people might meditate, you know, they might just go on holidays when you can. Right now we can't. Whether it's just going for a walk in the park, I learned to just enforce those things. For me, I had to enforce in my life because they weren't things which were normal for me. There wasn't self-care. I've come from a life where you just have to keep going, because I can't stop, because if I stop, no one isn't going to do it for me. I've come from a life where independence has been forced. It's just a part of who I am. It's etched into me. In a minute, I'm on the phone. So I'm on the call. So in a minute, what did we speak about me doing this? So can you, if you come back in my room, we're not going to no party.
You did say they check for you, boy. Listen.
Me.
Also, what I want to speak to you about is Listen Up research.
Yes.
Co-director.
So director, co-founder and co-director, yeah.
Up you and your chest. I love that. I love it so much. Could you just speak to us about Listen Up research, where we can find you, any socials?
Okay, so it's Listen Up Research. It's a not-for-profit company co-founded by myself and my colleague, Nick Marsh. Nick Marsh is a social worker, and we have worked together over a number of years. And one of the issues we continuously identified separately and together was what I said earlier, this footnote in reports, or, you know, this lack of focus on underrepresented children and young people and families. So we want to ensure that we really have a real focus on that, and that's what Listen Up is. So I would say we're that footnote. We provide training, consultation and evaluation of services. We explicitly focus on issues around race, racism, homophobia, gendered issues in relation to the experiences of, like, adultification, for example, and how that impacts boys and girls in different ways. We work with partner organisations who specialise in areas where we don't necessarily have that expertise, I should say, because I think it's really important that we remain authentic in terms of what we do and what we do not do, and what we can and cannot do. So anything in relation to the needs of disabled children, seen and unseen needs, we work with organisations around those different areas as well. And I would just say Listen Up for me is it's fresh, it's something which is doing really well. We have a number of followers, and we're working with quite a few organisations at the moment in, you know, supporting them in various ways. And we also are publishing quite a number of different articles, and we have some already out. So please do have a look out for us.
Lovely. And I just want to ask if there's just anything you just want to end with.
Whether you're a practitioner, you know, a manager, a director, ask that question: who's missing in our service, who's receiving services, and what can we be doing differently, and how can we ensure that our services are truly inclusive, reflective and representative of the young people who require our support.
Love that. Like, when I tell you, I'm super excited for all the things that you're going to do. I guess even when I think about how we missed each other at a particular organization, and we kind of found our way back together. So, like, I'm excited to be in the presence of you and the work you're going to do and the work you're already doing. So I guess you said it here that a book is coming. So I'm going to hold you to that. Like, every time I see your map, where's the book? You know how everyone's asking Rihanna, where's the album? I'm going to be asking, but where's the book, though?
That is hilarious.
So, like, I really appreciate you spending some time here and you sharing all the gems you shared. Like, really, like, I'm excited to put this out. I'm excited to speak to you. And, like, also, here's to ongoing conversations. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, this shouldn't be a one-time thing. So now I appreciate your time, Jahnine. Like, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I'm grateful.